Oh, have mercy. Ooh, wee, Lord.
It was Thanksgiving Day. I remember buckling in my son in his car seat, and next thing we know, that house right across the street from us is smoking a whole lot. So I immediately called 911.
Is it Brownlee house?
Yeah.
We arrived at the fire scene within minutes of 911 call. I witnessed 2 windows that had been breached, smoke coming out of them, smoke coming from the roof. The fire has got some air, it's really burning, and we got our work cut out for us.
My family, they come outside, and I remember hearing that somebody was indeed in the house. So at this point, our hearts dropped.
The most important thing is to get the victims out. We looked for a point of entry into the house, which on this house was going to obviously be the front door. They went in searching for the victim, trying to search thoroughly each room and bedroom for occupants. They searched the house until they made it to a bedroom. They found the victim in the bed. He was in the room with the fire was breaching out of the windows. He was within 10 feet of those windows. The bed was heavily consumed with fire. It was clear that he had passed away.
Me being from West Point, I just knew William Brownlee to be a respectful person. He was a church-going guy. He was 62 years of age. He had multiple sclerosis.
William Brownlee Sr., he lived there with his daughter-in-law, Latoya, and his son, William Brownlee Jr. William Brownlee Sr. was bedridden, and they both were taking care of him because of some health issues he had going on at the time. I just hated that fact that, hey, there was somebody that was in the house. That was a very difficult moment, and it was horrific.
I had never smelled someone burning. It is an indescribable smell, like you just couldn't even imagine.
He was bedridden. He didn't even have a chance to get up or try to escape the room. He was just there to suffer.
My gut was telling me something's really, really strange here. The fire was almost completely in William Sr.'s bedroom. The rest of the house was just heavily smoke damaged.
From the bed to where Mr. Brownlee laid and the wall right above his head, all of it was heavily burned, way worse from how it was on the other side of the room. And then I saw where the outlet, it was very heavily burned.
That seems very suspicious because it was a very new house. It was built 2 years before prior. They're built with modern wiring.
And to really cause the damage that it did, electrical fire just alone would not make this fire angry like it did. You definitely want to get down to the bottom of what went wrong for this fire to become fully engulfed in this one particular room.
I remember going to the back porch of the home. There where I found a lot of fluid bottle, and I took it into evidence.
I believe that the fire chief, he was pretty much confident that something went wrong in that room. He believed something was started for that fire to get so hot in certain areas that he wanted to go ahead and call the state fire marshal.
Latoya, she showed up in her vehicle. She gets out her car. She's crying. She's hysterical.
What we learned from the initial contact with Miss Latoya Brownlee was she had been visiting family for Thanksgiving before this incident took place. Then she left and went shopping with her auntie, Miss Virgie Gardner.
And that's when she got the call that the house was on fire. So she came back to the home. With it being Thanksgiving Day, you would think that everybody would have been together. And that left me wondering in my mind, okay, something else is going on here. It was almost like you just knew, like something just wasn't right.
Take a seat right there.
Biggest question was if this fire was actually intentionally set, and the next question was, if it was, why?
Can you give me a rundown of yesterday and what all took place?
All my brothers met at my house, and after that, we was going to my mom's house in Pontotoc in order to have Thanksgiving dinner. So my wife left home first before I did. She went to dinner in Yuma over her family's house. So I got a call about 4:26. Is when I actually got the call that my house was fully engulfed in flames.
Who gave you the call?
Tony Harris. He asked me where I was and told me I need to get to my house as soon as possible, that my house was on fire.
But did your wife ever call you at any time?
No.
Can you state your wife's name for the record?
Latoria Janae Brownway.
Okay, how long y'all been married?
18 years. Actually, I was filing for divorce next week.
Did she know about this?
Yes. I had an eviction notice for her.
Right.
We're still under the same roof,
Right.
but I moved on with my life and started, seeing someone else. And she is pregnant. I said, now by the time the child is born, yes, my child will be living under the same roof as me.
The fact that now she was being evicted from the house by him, and there would be an eviction hearing to have her removed from the house. Very important piece in this investigation.
So, when did all the problems and stuff start occurring?
Been occurring for many, many, many years. She tried to actually burn the house down 3 years ago. I stayed in Laker Road.
Mm-hmm.
I had a trailer there. I found burn marks on the wall on the sheetrock.
I learned before living with Mr. Brownlee Sr., Junior Brownlee, his wife, Latoria, they stayed in an old trailer. Junior Brownlee claims she tried to burn an outlet to start a fire. He said she used a plant to put it by an electrical outlet and light it up.
But she said that she didn't. I didn't actually call the police, but I will go in my grave believing that she done that.
Mm-hmm. Her and your dad get along pretty well?
I mean, yes. Yes, she used to, but since we've been going through our problems, she'll do anything to hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
So by hurting him, and she knows it hurts me.
If she got that angry before to try to start a house fire, she could have possibly got angry again to do the same.
Your dad was the owner of that house? Or
Yes, my dad was
Your
on.
dad was?
My dad was on.
9 times out of 10, if something was to happen to your dad, you was gonna get the house.
I was gonna get the house.
We are gonna go over here to the house. Fire marshal gonna be able to tell us where the fire started at.
You will know that today? Hopefully.
Should, hopefully.
The deputy fire marshal ruled out that it was any kind of electrical problems with the home. He basically told me that the fire was started by someone.
After going through the scene and examining like he did, he was also adamant that that fire started in that room. Now we have an intentional fire, and this is a murder investigation. So now we have a suspect that we need to find.
We began to look into the insurance claim. It went even over $20,000 policy. I didn't see enough there for that to be a motive coming from William Brownlee Jr. But on Latoria's hand, I looked at the fact of, you got this divorce situation. Pretty sure she was very upset. At that moment, she most definitely was a suspect for me.
I have Miss Virgie Gardner.
Gardner, yes.
You may run down how you and your niece came in contact yesterday.
We had Thanksgiving dinner, and after the dinner, we left coming to West Point to go to Walmart.
Right.
But when we got in West Point, she said, take me by the house to drop off this food. We went to by the house. This should have been like, what, around 4? And she got out, went in, and she came back out less than 5 minutes, and we went to Walmart. Soon as we got to Walmart, she got a call saying, smoke coming out of your house. And I'm all upset now. I said, well, is your father-in-law in the house? She said, yes. So I really got nervous then. And then I could see smoke from Walmart parking lot in the air.
Right.
We just left the house.
The store that she went to was not even a mile, if that, from the actual home.
She left at 4:05, a cell phone video that shows the fire fully engulfed at 409. That definitely raises suspicion about what took place at that house.
A house fire does not go from 0 to that in that time frame, naturally. A gas leak would have more of an explosion type situation. There's not a real natural cause that's going to allow it to burn that fast, that quick.
Basically what you telling me, y'all left from the residence around 4 or 5. Now, the person called 911 at 4:10, saying the house was in flames. And I got a video showing her the house in flames at that time. That room was burning before she left.
Really? She had to sit there and find. They're going through this divorce. And I told her just last week, I said, Tora, I said, don't do nothing stupid. She said, yeah, because I was I thought about going there and putting a knife in her. So, if I was asked, do I think she capable of doing this? I would say yes. She is evil, hateful, and low down, all of the above.
The Brownlee family, they live directly across the street from my family. I've never witnessed something so horrific before.
This is a small community, and the love of each other and the respect of each other pull us together. You hate to see a community hurt. You hate to see the families hurt.
My heart just heavy because just hated that fact that, hey, there was somebody that was in the house.
Oh, have mercy.
So after she went in the house and came back out to go to Walmart, what did she say?
She was talking about him, and when you see him, you just go ahead and tell him he wrong for what he doing. Tell her, leave that on you. I said, you just do what's right.
If an uncle or auntie say something about their niece or nephew, you could take it to the bank and cash it. Domestic situations can cause people to do some crazy things because, hurt people hurt people.
At that point, I was pretty much sold on it being her, but I still had to prove it. I had to get more than just word of mouth. So I received a video that was on Facebook Live at the time that the fire started. And this was at like 4:09. The 911 call came in around 4:10, 4:11.
At 4:11, LaToya makes a post on Facebook about the Black Friday sale. You look at the time span, and it was very odd to me. I think she made that post to try to create an alibi or try to, just say, hey, I didn't set a house afire.
What's up?
How you doing?
Fine, and you?
Good. All right, you do understand you're still up on the Miranda, so you're still willing to speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything's pointing to her. This house was set on fire. The situation going on between her and her husband. She's the only one that went in the house. Now is the time we gotta get her to break and tell us the truth.
As of right now, just tell me your thoughts. Just let me know what's going on.
I hate it happened, and I love my father-in-law. I hate it happened, and I just want to know what this stemmed from. What started this fire.
All right, you left Unum Thursday around what time again?
Say around 3:20, 3:30.
You left around 3:20, 3:30. What time you make it to town?
3:55.
And when you get to town, Before you left Unit, was you headed home or was you headed to Walmart?
Headed to Walmart.
All right. What made you go by the house?
They take my plate and I had to use the bathroom. And then I got in the house, took my plate to the kitchen, went to the bedroom and see him. He was in the bedroom. Then I was headed out. Then they asked for a piece of candy and I gave it to him. And he said, I smell some smoke. I said, I smell some too. And I looked in the utility room and I ain't see nothing burning or no smoke. And I went to the kitchen, make sure there wasn't on the eye, and I didn't see anything. And I came again and I said, I don't know what it is. And that was it, and I left.
You actually smelled smoke in the home and you still left? Common sense would have been like, I need to call somebody. I need to get somebody over here and see what's going on. It didn't sit well with me doing that interview with her.
How long was you at Walmart?
We was there no time. We pulled up in the parking lot and we was finna park and we pulled back out.
What was the reason for that?
Somebody called.
Did they call on Facebook or on your phone?
Facebook.
It should still be on Facebook. Think you got time to take a look and see? She called you at 4:11.
Okay.
And y'all stayed on the phone about 1 minute and 3 seconds, right?
I guess.
Okay. Was you on Facebook around that time?
Was I on Facebook? I was at Walmart, so I probably not.
You are aware that there's a Facebook post on your page that was made at 4:11 said you was in Walmart parking lot.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
You remember that?
I can't remember the post, but
You remember making that post?
I don't remember.
You can remember what you did inside the house for those 5 minutes. But all of a sudden, now you don't remember. I think she kind of felt like we was closing in on her. I had to go at it a little harder.
From what I'm looking at and from what the fire marshal report is saying, either you wasn't at home at 4 o'clock or you was there when the fire started.
Well, I wasn't there when no fire started because I don't think I...
Did you go in the room?
I went in his bedroom.
All right, did you go in his bedroom when you first got to the house or was it right before you left?
I went to the kitchen, then I went to his bedroom. Then we talked and he wanted... And then
Had you used the bathroom yet, like you said?
No, I hadn't used the bathroom.
But you told me you went to the bathroom. That's the reason when I said you went to the bathroom. You never said you didn't use the bathroom.
I didn't use it.
So you lied to me, think like you used the bathroom?
Well, I went to the bathroom and I didn't have to go, so I didn't go. But I did.
Listen, you need to start getting your story straight, and you need to be straight right now.
Okay, I'm
because I ain't got time for these lies. Okay.
I went to the bathroom and I didn't go. And I left out there and I went back to his room.
About how long was you in the house?
About 5 minutes. I did not see no fire, no smoke, no nothing. So you're not gonna make me say that. I did not see that, but I smelled it. I smelled it in the utility room, right in the area, the utility room and the bedroom. I smelled it.
Okay, we get that. The thing of it is, you still left.
I did.
Even though you smell smoke or whatever.
I thought it wasn't nothing because I ain't seen nothing. I left.
She continued to stick with her story over and over again. I'm still seeing the crime scene. I'm still seeing the remains of Mr. Brownlee. I'm still seeing how hot this room got. I want confessions. You still want to see if you can get her to go ahead and break.
And I went to the kitchen, make sure they went on the stove.
Seems like you was pretty upset with him. So you got a lot of lying going on. You better start being straight. You pretty expert in them outlets, ain't you?
No, I'm not.
You ever fooled around one before?
No, I did not.
You haven't?
I haven't.
Never?
Never.
You spoke with your husband?
You told me 3 years ago, back at the trailer, when y'all got into it, you went and tampered with it to start a fire on the trailer.
It was right. I didn't mess with the outlet itself per se. It was a plant right by the outlet, and I put the plant on fire. That's what I tampered with.
Oh, so that the plant was put on fire.
The plant right there by the outlet. That what made the thing right there. But I'd be a fool to go in and mess with this outlet and get shot. This crazy. Right there by
So how
the
you
outlet.
set the plant on fire?
It was a mattress.
A plant, a real live plant?
No, it was an artificial plant.
And you set it on fire with a mattress? We all had learned that LaToya Brownlee tried to set a previous house on fire because she got mad at Junior. And now, you know, the possibility of her doing this again after getting angry with her husband could be the very thing that started this fire.
I did not
Messing with stuff, so not messing with the plant.
I did not mess
Messing with an outlet.
I did not mess with no outlet at this new house. I did not do nothing, and you ain't gonna make me say I did something. I did not do nothing.
You did it with the outlet in the trailer, though. Is that what you're telling me?
I started right there by the outlet. The outlet probably caught on fire, but I'm not gonna put no fire to this outlet like this.
At that point, I was just like, all right, we're done. She didn't admit, yes, I set the house fire. But she attached herself to the timeline that we had.
So after that interview, I could have arrested her, but I didn't want to do it just yet because I knew I needed more evidence for it to stick.
It was just like a lemon. We was just trying to get all the juice as we could get out of that lemon. And so that's why we opted to continue this investigation.
The fire was intentionally set, so you start looking for accelerants that may have been poured there. What he saw was something was poured on the glove seat, the flooring, and the bed. He had a hydrocarbon detector. The hydrocarbon detector is going to pick up a petroleum product of some type. That detected some type of petroleum product was poured. It could have been lighter fluid, it could have been gasoline.
He added an interesting fact that there was also an accelerant on a outlet across the room from the bed. There was no accident at the electrical outlet. There was no faulty electrical outlet. There was an accelerant.
Somebody poured liquid on the outlet, trying to make it look like the outlet had started the fire. But it doesn't go from her being in the house at 4:07, closing the door, walking out, to what you had 2 minutes later from a naturally occurring electrical fire in a wall. It doesn't happen.
Another specific detail that he gave us that was important, that there was charring on the inside of the door of the room, but there were none on the outside.
We determined that the door had been closed during the fire. Now, at some point in time, it was opened by my guys when they were fighting the fire.
When I looked over the log, we found out there was entry at 4:02 p.m. of that day, and then there was an exit at 4:07 p.m. LaToya had already told us she went in the house alone within that time span.
You got a Facebook video at 4:09 of the fire already coming out of the home. It was on a 2-minute window there.
No one else could have went in this house but Miss Brownlee to start this fire. Everything's pointing to her.
Even though we had all the evidence that we had, I still wanted to talk to her because I still wanted that confession from her as to why she done what she done.
This is a murder investigation. Somebody lost their life. So as much as we possibly can get from her, if she was willing to talk, is what we were going to continue to get. Fire Marshal Mike Ivy and Detective Johnson were interviewing her. Of course, Mike, he would take the lead.
This is a tragedy, and it's up to us to figure out what happened. And when the investigators looked at the scene yesterday, they determined that somebody purposely set the fire. So where we're at right now is to try to figure out what happened.
When did they set the fire?
Where?
Yes.
In the bedroom where he was. The problem we've got is somebody set the fire. And we can't find anybody that was in that house other than you.
I didn't set no fire. I wouldn't harm that man. I seen him just like my daddy. And I wouldn't harm him at all. I ain't seen no smoke and no fire in this room at all.
Okay. Did you keep any flammable liquids in the house, like paint thinner, gasoline?
He keep lighter fluid and gasoline out there, but this stuff he can keep out there.
Had you used any of it lately?
No.
Well, I don't know exactly what to tell you, but this is not going to go away.
I don't want it to go away. I want her to find out what happened because an innocent man lost his life. That fire did not start because of me.
After I saw that she wasn't budging, I moved closer because I wanted to establish a rapport with her. And I wanted to see her face. Why not? Just go ahead and lay it all out here. It was worth a shot.
Are you aware that ADT logs down the time that whenever somebody come in and whenever they leave out?
They what?
Are you aware that they log down whenever the door is open?
Yeah.
Are you aware that nobody else entered the house in between 12:30 and 4 o'clock?
And I wasn't aware of that.
And you're correct, you got home around 4.
Mm-hmm.
You went in and, matter of fact, 4:02. Got the door closed behind you. I guess they do it within like a minute time frame. The door closed behind you at 4:03. The door opens at 4:06. They got you leaving out at 4:07.
Okay.
You leave the house at 4:07.
Mm-hmm.
We got a video recorded at 4:09, 4:10 with the house blazed up. I'm talking about flame. I already busted through the window where the old man was laying. There was 2 windows right there. And your phone call that you got on Facebook, that was at 4:11. You showed it to me yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From 4:07 to 4:11, ain't no way a fire is gonna build up that much pressure in what, 4 minutes to blow one out and then fire already shooting through the roof.
I'm getting fed up about it because it seems like y'all harassing me.
But you're not answering my question. Can you see a fire starting that fast from 4:07 to 4:11?
I don't know nothing about fires, how fast they start or whatever. I don't know, I can't answer that. I don't know how fast fires start or whatever, but I know I did not start no fire. I did not kill no innocent person, a handicapped person. I did not do that. And I will say that to the end. I did not do that.
Well, and I'm going to be honest with you. We think you did.
When I took him, when I gave him that candy, I was in the room with him. I didn't see no smoke. I didn't see no sign of no smoke, but I smelled smoke. I said, well, we'll get Junior to check it when he get here. He said, okay.
Right. And you closed the door and walked out?
No, I don't close the door. I don't close the door.
You don't close the door?
No.
All right. Now we got another problem.
What?
Because I know he didn't get out the bed and go and close the door.
That door was not closed. If I was the last one there, I know I did not close that door. And I know that he did not get out the bed and walk over and close the door.
So you ought to feel like me, it's a problem somewhere where someone closed that door. And that ought to be something you're concerned about. Who closed the door? You should also be concerned about who was in the house to set this fire. And for it to go that fast, there had to been some kind of accelerant or something poured to make it just blaze that fast. I've been doing this a long time. He's been around this a long time. This doesn't happen in 2 minutes.
I just know I didn't do it.
What I'm saying is, forget about the fire being set.
Right.
There was a fire in that room at that time, and you're putting yourself in the room. You're saying, I gave him the candy. I stood by the bed.
There wasn't no fire in the room.
There was.
I didn't see no fire.
There was. There was.
I didn't see that.
There's no way you could have.
I didn't see a fire in the room, and there ain't no way I leave a person right there, handicapped person, see a fire and can't get out.
I mean, that was her story. I felt like she was gonna stick to it. So I got to dealing with just her personal life as far as her and her husband. I figured if I could play on that side of her emotions, that she would maybe get upset and actually like tell me what it was as to the reason why she did it.
But listen to me. I understand what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
I understand your husband made you mad. Past month or so, I understand it's a lot going on. It's a lot you're dealing with. It's a lot on you.
Got nothing to do with the situation at hand.
You knew this divorce was coming up. You knew all of this. I understand that.
Me and his situation ain't got nothing to do with this situation at hand. I wouldn't have took no innocent life over my situation.
I understand that you wanted to hurt your husband. I understand that. You wanted to hurt him.
I want to be that.
I understand.
I want to hurt him. I hurt him, not hurt his dad.
I understand
so
that.
I don't even put that like
you already said you wanted to hurt him before. I understand all of that. But why? Just tell me why. I know.
Okay, you want to arrest me?
Tell me why you did it at the trailer and he made you so mad that you wanted to burn the trailer down then. Why? Why did you do it? Just tell me why. That's all I want to know.
When we was at the trailer, I had set that plant on.
It wasn't a plant.
It was a
socket in the wall.
It was a plant right by the socket on the wall.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Don't tell me what I did.
You did it with that socket.
No, I know what I did.
And you did it with this socket.
I know what I did. And I ain't messing with I know. Okay, well arrest me. I know what I did.
Listen.
And I know I didn't harm no innocent man, crippled man that can't do nothing for themselves. I will never do nothing like that, young or old.
Well, the only thing I can say is what you're saying. This is your last opportunity. If you want to make this right and talk about, there was a fire. Well, forget about being there.
I didn't say no fire. No, don't stop this right here. Because I didn't do none of it.
Let me and him go ahead and speak for a second. We're gonna let you go.
We wanted to arrest her, but that would become risky because then she would probably lawyer up. We were still waiting on the autopsy and the lab report. We wanted to make sure that when it was time to make that arrest, we had everything set in stone to move forward.
All right, Tori. If you ain't got nothing else to talk to us about, and nothing else you want to tell us, free to go.
Okay.
I really wish you could have cleared it up more. That's part of it.
That is what it is. That's what happened. So there ain't nothing else I can say about it.
All right.
At the end of that interview, she looked back at us and it was like, dang, y'all still ain't gonna arrest me, and just walked on out like it was nothing. I felt like it was just a waiting game. Like I knew next time I see you, I'ma have you in handcuffs.
There was lighter fluid that was used on the bed, the love seat, and to the wall outlet in the house. We also get the preliminary autopsy report from the medical examiner's office.
Mr. Brownlee died of thermal injuries, meaning he burned to death.
The manner of death was a homicide. Accelerant was poured all over his body as well as in his mouth. And I thought back to my conversation with LaToya about how I gave him a piece of candy.
Then he asked for a piece of candy, and I gave it to him.
There's something about this piece of candy that she claims she gave him that's not registering. And that left me wondering in my mind, okay, something else is going on here. Could it be the lighter fluid that she had put in his mouth?
And he said, I smell some smoke. I said, I smell some too.
It's one thing to burn, but to burn from your mouth and your body like that was just, what I would say is just low down. Exactly the words that her aunt said about her in that interview.
So she is evil, hateful, and lowdown, all of the above.
She was just this low-down individual that'll do anything she had to do to get back at her husband. She didn't put up a fight, didn't argue, didn't fuss. She just put the handcuffs on and got in the car.
Capital murder is a very serious charge in the state of Mississippi. Capital murder means that, you can be sentenced to death. And she was facing that. She was facing those consequences for her actions. We was working hand in hand with the district attorney's office. This case was potentially going to trial, but I still wanted her to go ahead and give the confession. The family deserved it. The family deserved the truth about what happened to their father.
So we do got the camera on.
Okay.
Your name is Latoya Brown.
Yes,
correct?
it is.
All right. You understand the charge that you have right
Yes.
now?
Mm-hmm.
What you charged with right now?
Capital.
Capital murder. I know I'm not your lawyer, Latoya. If there's anything that might help you, it's better for you to say it now than to wait on to go to court. But if you get charged with capital murder, and that's the only statute in the state of Mississippi where they will kill you. It might be 5 years after you go to jail, it might be 10, but they will kill you.
Can I talk?
Yeah, you free to talk.
What did I have to gain by killing him? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, you tell me.
That's the reason why my parents got a lawyer. You want to know something about that? About the lawyer? They ain't give me just one. They got me 5 paid lawyers. You feel me? Put that on your recorder.
You can go and get 10 different lawyers, okay? But it don't change facts of a case. And I'm telling you, Toya, I'm telling you, it ain't looking good on your end.
And I would tell you something else regarding that situation, but I'm gonna let it all be a surprise. When I go to court, the world gonna know.
And I'm telling you, you don't want to wait on court to decide to.
Why?
Because at that point, it's going to be pretty much too late.
No, I'm not.
I'm telling you. What you think can happen? I'm just telling you, Toya, you got a long road to travel. You feel better getting it off your chest. You really, 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 really want to get this off your chest.
Okay, first of all, first and foremost, when I first entered that house, I didn't smell no smoke. That's the first thing. I didn't smell no smoke until he told me to go and get his towel, which was by the chair, by the window. That's when I noticed some smoke. And then I went and checked the stove. I came back, it wasn't no smoke back there. It was over by his window. So whatever started, it was on the outside of that house. It wasn't nothing in that house burning.
You never told us about a fire or smoke outside of the window, but here we are now.
Why you just not telling me about this window?
I said that before. Well, I thought I did. If I knew who did this, I would say who did it. I'm not gonna go down for somebody, you know what I'm saying? I don't have no idea. I went and checked the kitchen, my bedroom, kids' bedroom, the bathroom, nothing. You think I pour some damn gas on this man? I'd be a crazy damn fool to do some stuff like that. And furthermore, this man ain't never did nothing to me for me to take his life.
Toya, I wish you the best outcome. Life itself is too short. You might not tell me today. You might not tell me when it comes around to your court date. And I might be old and gray by the time you decide to tell what really happened that day. But like I told you, whether you got 1 lawyer or 5 lawyers, he don't change facts of a case. Okay?
Like I said, I didn't commit this crime, so I already know I'm not finna go down for something I didn't do. One thing about it, God done already showed me. I'm lined up with God. He done already showed me. I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna walk. Cause when I get through pleading my case, I'm gonna walk. Believe it.
And you said you're a Christian, so I believe I can go there.
Mm-hmm.
God always forgive you. Or you can keep living in denial. That's between but you and God. But I can tell you, on that day, when you go to court, I hope God is with you that day. Because it ain't gonna work out the way you think it's gonna work out.
We gave her so many chances to go ahead and present the facts, but then she went back to the snoring. And so after the final interview with her, we were prepared to go to court with her and the 5 lawyers that she had. I remember when the judge, he asked her, why are you pleading guilty? And she finally said, because I did it. It wasn't a confession we dreamed of, but we got our confession. And it took going in front of the judge for her to finally admit what she had did. And that was the confession that we were wanting.
I feel like her motive was to get back at her husband. And she done that by taking his dad from him.
It was such a hard situation that affected so many different people. So many different lives were changed behind this.
He was a great guy. He was a church-going man and a great family man. So that's how the city of West Point can remember Mr. William Brownlee Sr.
The city had learned how to ignore the silence. Not because Los Angeles was quiet. It never was. Sirens sliced through the night. Helicopters circled overhead. Neon signs glowed above liquor stores that never seemed to close. Somewhere, every hour of every day, another crime scene was being taped off, another detective was knocking on another stranger's door, another family was waiting for news that would change everything. Violence was part of the rhythm. Tragedy had become background noise. And that was exactly why a predator survived. For years, women disappeared into the darkness of South Central Los Angeles with barely a whisper. Some were found days later in abandoned alleys. Others lay hidden in dumpsters, behind vacant buildings, or along neglected streets where few people stopped long enough to notice another body. The headlines, when they appeared at all, were small. The investigations moved slowly. Witnesses were scarce. Leads faded almost as quickly as they emerged. The city kept moving. Then another woman died. And another. And another. At first glance, none of the cases seemed extraordinary. Detectives saw familiar patterns common to countless homicide investigations. The victims often lived difficult lives. Some struggled with addiction. Some drifted from place to place. Many came from neighborhoods already overwhelmed by crime, poverty, and distrust of law enforcement. Their disappearances rarely sparked national attention. Television cameras seldom arrived. Outside their families and closest friends, few people realized they were gone. Yet hidden beneath the growing pile of case files was a chilling pattern that no one could fully see. Someone was hunting. Someone was choosing victims carefully. Someone was returning home after every murder and blending back into ordinary life. Years passed. The killer waited. Then he struck again. Fear spread quietly through the community, but it did not spread like panic. It spread like a rumor people were almost afraid to say aloud. Mothers warned daughters not to walk alone after dark. Women glanced over their shoulders at unfamiliar cars moving slowly along neighborhood streets. Men who had lived in the area for decades began noticing how many memorial candles burned beside telephone poles. Every new homicide deepened the unease. Every unanswered question strengthened the mystery. Inside police headquarters, detectives pinned photographs on a crowded bulletin boards. Faces stared back at them. Young women, hopeful smiles frozen forever inside driver's license photos. Family portraits, school pictures, snapshots from birthdays that no one imagined would become memorials. Red strings connected locations across maps of South Los Angeles. Dates were circled. Timelines stretched longer than anyone wanted to admit. Still, the picture refused to come into focus. Some investigators suspected a serial killer. Others believed the similarities were coincidence. Without forensic breakthroughs, certainty remained elusive. This was the era before DNA databases transformed homicide investigations. Evidence could be collected, preserved, and carefully documented, yet still sit inside storage lockers for years waiting for technology capable of revealing its secrets. Detectives relied heavily on eyewitnesses, informants, interviews, and instinct. But instinct had limits. The killer understood those limits. He left remarkably little behind. He appeared without warning. He vanished just as quickly. No dramatic letters arrived at newspapers. No phone calls taunted investigators. No cryptic messages were painted across walls. Unlike serial murderers who craved publicity, this predator seemed almost invisible. He did not seek fame. He sought anonymity. That made him infinitely more dangerous. Because the most terrifying monsters are often the ones nobody notices. The murders appeared to stop. Months became years. Years became decades. Investigators who had worked the earliest crime scenes retired. New detectives inherited dusty boxes filled with faded reports, aging photographs, handwritten notes, and unanswered questions. The files were labeled, archived, and stored alongside countless other unsolved cases that had gradually slipped from public memory. Many assumed the killer was dead. Others believed he had moved away. Some quietly feared he was simply waiting. Cold cases possess a unique kind of cruelty. Time destroys evidence. Witnesses forget details. Neighborhoods change. Buildings are demolished. Families relocate. People who once remembered everything begin remembering almost nothing. Every passing year makes justice harder to reach. Yet cold cases also carry something unexpected. Hope. Because evidence preserved decades earlier can suddenly become the single thread capable of unraveling an entire mystery. Unknown to everyone, that thread had already been collected. It sat quietly inside an evidence locker. Waiting. Outside the police department, life continued as though the nightmare had ended. Children grew into adults. Businesses opened and closed. Entire generations never realized they were living in neighborhoods haunted by crimes that had never truly been solved. Among those ordinary residents lived a man whose daily routine attracted almost no attention. Neighbors saw him mowing the lawn, driving familiar streets, talking casually with people who passed his house, attending family gatherings, smiling for photographs. Nothing about him demanded a second look. He looked like someone who belonged. That ordinary appearance became his greatest disguise. The possibility that a serial killer could hide behind such an unremarkable life challenged one of society's most comforting assumptions. That evil announces itself. That murderers look different. That danger wears a recognizable face. Reality rarely offers such reassurance. Some killers hide behind masks. Others never need one. As investigators revisited forgotten evidence years later, advances in forensic science began rewriting what detectives believed possible. DNA analysis had evolved dramatically. Samples once considered too small or too degraded suddenly became valuable. Tiny biological traces invisible to investigators decades earlier now carried extraordinary significance. Old evidence gained new life. Laboratories reopened sealed packages. Technicians examined preserved samples with technologies unavailable when the crimes first occurred. Every test represented another chance. Another possibility. Another fragile hope. Across the country, cold cases were falling as science caught up with history. Murderers who believed they had escaped forever suddenly found investigators knocking on their doors decades after committing their crimes. The message was becoming unmistakable. Time no longer guaranteed freedom. But this investigation remained exceptionally difficult. Even with DNA, detectives still faced one overwhelming obstacle. They needed a name. A genetic profile without an identity is only half a solution. Somewhere in Los Angeles, the unknown man whose DNA appeared repeatedly across multiple crime scenes was living an ordinary life. He paid bills. He spoke with neighbors. He celebrated birthdays. He existed within the same sprawling city where investigators searched desperately for him. The irony was almost unbearable. The hunter had become invisible by acting completely normal. As months turned into years, detectives refused to abandon the case. Every overlooked document received another review. Every surviving witness was contacted again. Every technological breakthrough sparked renewed optimism. Most produced disappointment. One eventually changed everything. Not because the killer suddenly made a mistake, because science finally became clever enough to find him. Long before anyone uttered the nickname Grim Sleeper on national television, long before newspapers splashed his face across front pages, long before shocked neighbors told reporters they could never have imagined what had been happening behind the walls of an ordinary house, the truth existed only as fragments, isolated crime scenes, grieving families, unanswered questions, and a predator confident that history had already forgotten his victims. He believed the silence protected him. He believed time erased suspicion. He believed ordinary life was the perfect hiding place. For nearly a quarter of a century, that belief appeared correct. Then quietly, almost invisibly, the investigation began moving again. Not with flashing lights. Not with dramatic arrests. Not with a confession. It began inside a laboratory where a few microscopic cells preserved across decades refused to let the dead be forgotten. The evidence did not speak with a voice. It whispered. Inside refrigerated storage rooms and sealed cardboard boxes, fragments of forgotten crime scenes waded through years of dust, administrative transfers, budget cuts, and changing generations of detectives. Labels yellowed. Ink faded. Some investigators who had collected the evidence had already retired. Others had passed away. Yet the smallest traces remained untouched by time, preserving a story no witness had been able to tell. Every cold case begins to feel like history. This one refused to stay buried. By the early years of a new century, forensic science had entered a different era. Techniques that once demanded large, pristine biological samples could now recover genetic information from material almost invisible to the naked eye. Across the United States, long unsolved murders were suddenly returning to life inside crime laboratories. Detectives who had spent decades chasing dead ends found themselves reopening evidence lockers with cautious optimism. The files connected to the South Los Angeles murders were among those brought back into the light. Each document was examined again. Every photograph was scanned. Every laboratory report was compared against the others. Patterns that once seemed uncertain gradually became impossible to ignore. Several victims had been killed in strikingly similar ways. The locations where their bodies were abandoned suggested planning rather than panic. More importantly, biological evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes pointed toward a single unidentified male. The conclusion was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. The killer had never disappeared. Only the investigation had fallen behind. Detectives understood that possessing the offender's DNA solved only part of the puzzle. They still needed a name, an address, a face. Existing databases contained millions of profiles, but only from individuals whose DNA had been lawfully collected through previous arrests or other qualifying circumstances. If the killer had never entered the system, or if his DNA had never been submitted, there would be no match. The genetic profile remained anonymous. A ghost hidden inside a computer. Investigators explored every possibility. Former suspects were reviewed again. Men questioned decades earlier were re-examined. Alibis were checked against timelines that had grown increasingly detailed over the years. Some leads collapsed within hours. Others survived for weeks before ending in disappointment. Frustration became routine. Every promising clue seemed to dissolve just beyond reach. Yet detectives refused to believe that a man capable of committing multiple murders could erase every trace of his existence forever. Somewhere, they reasoned, he had family, friends, neighbors, co-workers. Someone had crossed paths with him thousands of times without realizing they had stood beside a serial killer. That thought haunted the investigation. The unknown offender was almost certainly living an ordinary life. Perhaps he laughed with coworkers during lunch breaks. Perhaps he waved at children riding bicycles past his house. Perhaps he attended birthday parties, weddings, holiday dinners. The image disturbed even veteran homicide investigators. Monsters, they knew, rarely resemble monsters. As the investigation continued, analysts constructed increasingly detailed behavioral profiles. The offender appeared patient, controlled, and familiar with the neighborhoods where the victims disappeared. He seemed comfortable moving through communities that outsiders often misunderstood. His confidence suggested experience. His ability to avoid identification over so many years pointed toward discipline rather than luck. Still, profiles could only suggest possibilities. Evidence remained king. The breakthrough would not arrive through instinct alone. It would come from an unexpected direction, one that had barely existed when the murders began. Familial DNA searching represented a remarkable evolution in forensic investigation. Instead of requiring an exact genetic match, analysts could identify close biological relatives whose DNA already existed inside criminal databases. A partial match might indicate a parent, child, or sibling, dramatically narrowing the search for an otherwise invisible suspect. It was an approach that demanded meticulous legal review, scientific precision, and extraordinary patience. When investigators authorized the process, expectations remained cautious. Most searches produced nothing. Some generated distant relatives impossible to investigate effectively. But occasionally, the results pointed detectives toward an entirely new path. This case became one of those rare exceptions. A partial genetic connection emerged. Not the killer himself. Someone biologically related to him. The development electrified the investigative team. For the first time in decades, the unknown predator no longer existed as a faceless DNA profile. He now occupied a family tree. Somewhere within that network of relatives stood the man detectives had pursued for years without ever knowing his identity. The search became dramatically more focused. Investigators quietly reconstructed family relationships. Birth records, addresses, employment histories, photographs, vehicle registrations. The process resembled assembling an enormous puzzle whose pieces had been scattered across decades. One name gradually attracted increasing attention. Nothing about him appeared extraordinary at first glance. He lived an unremarkable life. He blended effortlessly into his surroundings. Those very qualities made detectives increasingly uneasy. Surveillance began carefully, patiently, without fanfare. Experienced investigators understand that suspects often reveal more during ordinary routines than during formal interrogations. Days turned into weeks as officers documented movements, visitors, vehicles, habits, and daily schedules. Everything appeared normal. almost painfully normal. The ordinary routine itself became unsettling. How could someone connected to one of Los Angeles's most elusive homicide investigations appear so completely average? Detectives reminded themselves not to confuse appearance with reality. History had taught them that some of the world's most notorious offenders maintained remarkably conventional public lives. The challenge lay in proving it. One obstacle remained. Although investigators possessed a compelling investigative lead, they still required a direct DNA sample from the suspect himself. Without that confirmation, the case could not move forward. Obtaining such evidence required careful planning. Every decision carried legal consequences. Every mistake risked jeopardizing decades of work. Investigators waited. They observed. They documented. Patience, once again, became their greatest weapon. Meanwhile, the suspect continued living exactly as he always had, apparently unaware that the walls surrounding his anonymity were slowly closing. The contrast was extraordinary. On one side stood detectives who had spent years chasing an invisible killer. On the other stood a man going about his daily business, never openly acknowledging the shadows that investigators believed followed him everywhere. Neither side fully understood how close the investigation had come to its defining moment. The city carried on. Traffic clogged the freeways. Morning commuters filled buses and trains. Children walked to school. News broadcasts covered new crimes, new emergencies, new headlines. Few people realized that one of Los Angeles's longest-running homicide investigations was approaching a turning point that had been decades in the making. Justice often arrives without warning. Not through dramatic confrontations. Not through desperate confessions. Sometimes it advances quietly, hidden behind laboratory reports, surveillance logs, and countless hours of patient detective work that rarely earns public attention. Somewhere inside police headquarters, investigators reviewed one more report, compared one more timeline, verified one more detail. Each small step tightened the circle. The mystery that had once seemed impossible to solve was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to surrender its secrets. The killer had spent years believing distance from the crime scenes guaranteed safety. He had counted on fading memories. He had trusted the passage of time. What he could never have anticipated was that the smallest fragment of biological evidence, preserved through decades of silence, would continue speaking long after every witness had forgotten his face. For years, the investigation had moved in inches. Now it began moving in seconds. The surveillance team knew the most dangerous moment in any long-running case was not the beginning. It was the moment investigators believed they had finally found the right man. Confidence could become complacency. Assumptions could destroy evidence. Every observation had to be documented with absolute precision, every movement recorded, every decision capable of surviving the scrutiny of courtroom. The suspect never appeared to sense the pressure closing around him. He drove familiar streets, stopped at ordinary businesses, exchanged casual greetings with neighbors. Nothing in his routine suggested panic. Nothing hinted that detectives believed they were watching a man connected to murders stretching back decades. That normality became its own form of psychological tension. Investigators watched someone who seemed completely at ease while carrying the weight of accusations he did not yet know existed. Every ordinary gesture, a cup of coffee, a conversation on the sidewalk, an afternoon spent working around the house, stood in stark contrast to the photographs spread across homicide desks downtown. Victims, crime scenes, evidence bags, DNA reports. The two realities felt impossible to reconcile. Yet experience had taught detectives never to underestimate the power of an ordinary facade. Behind every surveillance log was the same question. What happens when a man we've searched for all these years finally realizes we found him? The answer depended on science. Investigators still required one decisive comparison between the suspect's DNA and the biological evidence preserved from multiple homicide scenes. Without that confirmation, decades of work remained an elaborate theory rather than a prosecutable case. The opportunity arrived without warning. Like countless people going about their daily routines, the suspect discarded something that no longer held value to him. To investigators, it was invaluable. Once abandoned in a public place, the item could be lawfully collected, carefully preserved, and submitted for forensic examination. Officers handled it with extraordinary caution. Every transfer was documented, every seal recorded. There could be no question about the integrity of the evidence. Then came the waiting. Hours inside a laboratory often feel longer than years in an investigation. Detectives who had spent careers chasing violent offenders understood the importance of patience, but that understanding did little to ease the tension. Phones remained within reach. Conversations became shorter. Every ring seemed capable of delivering the answer they had pursued for decades. Finally, the report arrived. The DNA profile recovered from the discarded item matched the biological evidence collected from multiple murder scenes. The unknown killer was unknown no longer. The silence inside the investigative office lasted only a moment. Then the room erupted into motion. Supervisors were notified. Search warrants were finalized. Arrest plans were reviewed repeatedly. Every operational detail was examined with the understanding that the suspect might be armed, unpredictable, or determined to destroy evidence if given the slightest opportunity. There would be no dramatic public announcement. No warning. No second chance. The operation had to unfold with speed and precision. Before dawn, officers assembled. Specialized units received final briefings. Photographs were reviewed one last time. Maps of a neighborhood were spread across tables. Each officer understood the significance of the assignment. This was not simply another arrest. This was the culmination of an investigation that had haunted Los Angeles for a generation. As daylight began creeping across the city, law enforcement vehicles moved quietly into position. Neighbors noticed little at first. A few unfamiliar cars. A slightly heavier police presence. Nothing that hinted at the history about to collide with an otherwise ordinary residential street. Then the warrants were executed. The suspect was taken into custody. Years of speculation suddenly became a name, a face, and a pair of handcuffs. News traveled quickly through law enforcement circles before reaching television stations. Within hours, reporters gathered outside police headquarters. Camera crews lined sidewalks. Microphones pointed toward officials preparing to answer the question everyone had been asking for decades. Had the grim sleeper finally been caught? For investigators, celebration remained restrained. An arrest was not a conviction. Every statement had to reflect evidence rather than emotion. The case would now move from the streets into courtrooms, where every forensic finding, every investigative decision, and every procedural step would face relentless examination. Meanwhile, another chapter was beginning. Search teams entered the suspect's residence. Each room was photographed before anything was touched. Drawers were opened methodically. Boxes cataloged. Computers secured. Firearms documented. Nothing was considered too insignificant to examine. The search produced discoveries that deepened the mystery surrounding the man investigators believed had lived unnoticed among his neighbors for years. Thousands of photographs were recovered. Many depicted women. Some appear to have been taken casually. Others raised disturbing questions that investigators could not immediately answer. Who were these women? How many were ever identified? How many families had no idea their loved one's image had been stored inside this house? The photographs transformed the investigation once again. Detectives began the painstaking task of identifying every possible face. Some women were located alive. Others remained unknown. Each image represented another thread leading into a past still clouded by uncertainty. Outside, public reaction intensified. Residents expressed disbelief. Many described the suspect as quiet, polite, unremarkable. The words sounded painfully familiar. Again and again, history repeated the same unsettling lesson. Extraordinary violence often hides beneath ordinary appearances. For families of the confirmed victims, the arrest delivered emotions too complicated to describe with a single word. Relief, grief, anger, exhaustion. Some had waited decades for this moment, refusing to let memories fade even as public attention disappeared. They had attended anniversaries without answers, birthdays marked by absence, holidays forever altered by loss. Now, at last, the investigation had a suspect. But justice could never return the years that had been stolen. Questions still lingered. Were all of the murders connected? Were there additional victims who had never been found? Had opportunities to stop the killer existed years earlier? Investigators continued reviewing missing person reports stretching back across decades, comparing names, dates, locations, and forensic evidence with renewed urgency. The arrest had solved one mystery. It had exposed many others. Even inside police headquarters, seasoned detectives recognized that the case would not end with a single press conference. It would continue through forensic analysis, witness interviews, courtroom testimony, and the painstaking reconstruction of a criminal history that had remained hidden in plain sight for nearly 25 years. The city that had once overlooked scattered clues was now forced to confront the full scale of what those clues had represented. A serial predator had lived among millions. He had walked the same sidewalks, driven the same streets, shopped in the same stores. While investigators searched relentlessly for a phantom, the man they sought had blended into the landscape with unsettling ease. The revelation challenged more than an investigation. It challenged the comforting belief that evil can always be recognized before it strikes. Sometimes it cannot. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it waves to the neighbors. Sometimes it disappears into ordinary life so completely that decades pass before anyone realizes they have been living beside history's darkest secrets. And even after the arrest, one unsettling truth refused to disappear. The DNA had identified a suspect. The evidence had supported criminal charges. But the full story of every woman whose path may have crossed has remained unfinished, scattered across faded case files, forgotten photographs, and memories that time had already begun to erase. For detectives, the hunt was over. For the truth, it was only entering its most revealing chapter. Courtrooms are built for facts. They're not built for ghosts. Yet as prosecutors prepared their case, the ghosts were everywhere. They lingered in faded photographs, brittle police reports, handwritten detective notes, and evidence bags that had survived decades inside secure storage. Every exhibit represented a life interrupted. Every document marked another attempt to answer questions that had remained suspended for years. The investigation had crossed an important threshold with the arrest, but prosecutors understood that public belief and legal proof were two very different things. The burden now rested on demonstrating, piece by piece, how physical evidence, forensic science, witness testimony, and investigative work converged into a coherent account that could withstand relentless scrutiny. The defense examined every detail, every collection date, every laboratory procedure, every decision made by detectives over the course of an investigation spanning generations. That scrutiny was expected. In a case carrying such extraordinary consequences, nothing less would suffice. Meanwhile, investigators continued following leads generated after the arrest. Telephones rang with new tips. Some callers believed they had seen something suspicious years earlier. Others wondered whether missing relatives might somehow be connected to the investigation. Many of those leads ultimately led nowhere, but each required careful review. Cold cases demand patience even after an arrest. Evidence does not become stronger simply because the suspect has been identified. It must still speak for itself. Forensic specialists revisited materials collected decades earlier, applying modern analytical techniques unavailable when the crimes first occurred. Advances in DNA testing had already transformed the investigation, but prosecutors sought to reinforce the case wherever possible through corroborating evidence, timelines, and documented investigative findings. The passage of time complicated everything. Some witnesses struggled to recall precise details. Others had moved away. Some could no longer testify. Memories fade. Documents deteriorate. Neighborhoods change beyond recognition. Justice delayed often requires rebuilding history from fragments. Families of the victims faced a different challenge. For years, many had lived between hope and grief, never fully certain whether meaningful answers would arrive. Now, they found themselves returning to courtrooms, speaking with investigators once again, revisiting memories they had spent years trying to endure rather than relive. Closure, they discovered, is rarely a single moment. It is a process, one measured not only by verdicts but by acknowledgement, by having forgotten names spoken aloud again, by ensuring that victims were remembered as people rather than statistics. Public attention intensified. National media revisited the investigation, describing how developments in forensic science had helped identify a suspect after decades of uncertainty. Commentators examined broader questions extending beyond one individual case. How many other investigations might still be waiting for technological breakthroughs? How many preserved evidence kits contained answers that earlier generations simply lacked the tools to uncover? The discussion reached far beyond Los Angeles. Law enforcement agencies across the country reviewed aging homicide files with renewed determination. Science had changed the landscape. Cases once considered unsolvable no longer appeared beyond reach. Yet investigators remained careful not to overstate certainty where unanswered questions remained. One issue continued to generate debate. Could every crime attributed to the so-called grim sleeper be linked with complete confidence? Some incidents rested upon exceptionally strong forensic evidence. Others depended on patterns, investigative assessments, or circumstantial connections that required careful evaluation. Responsible investigators distinguished between confirmed findings and unresolved possibilities. That distinction mattered. History deserved accuracy. The victims deserved accuracy. The courtroom deserved accuracy. As proceedings continued, jurors were presented with evidence accumulated over many years. Prosecutors sought to demonstrate continuity across multiple crimes, while the defense challenged interpretations and investigative conclusions. The atmosphere remained heavy, not because of dramatic outbursts, but because nearly every witness carried the weight of elapsed time. Each testimony bridged decades. Each answer connected the present with events many believed would never receive their day in court. Outside the courthouse, reporters summarized each day's developments. Cameras captured families entering and leaving the building, often surrounded by microphones, yet speaking very little. In cases like this, silence frequently conveyed more than prepared statements ever could. For investigators who had spent years pursuing the case, the proceedings represented something deeply personal. Many remembered opening forgotten evidence boxes long before headlines returned. Many remembered setbacks that seemed impossible to overcome. Many remembered moments when the investigation appeared destined to remain permanently unsolved. Now those years of persistence were being examined in open court. Every decision mattered. Every preserved sample mattered. Every detective who had refused to discard an old file had unknowingly helped carry the investigation toward this point. The story was no longer only about one suspect. It had become a testament to the importance of preserving evidence, revisiting unanswered questions, and recognizing that time, while often an obstacle, can also become an ally when science continues to advance. Even so, the emotional center of the case never shifted. It remained with the women whose lives had been taken, the families who had waited through years of uncertainty, and the community that had carried the memory of violence long after public attention moved elsewhere. The legal process would ultimately determine criminal responsibility. History, however, would remember something larger. A predator had hidden behind ordinary routines for years. An investigation had nearly disappeared into archival storage. And a handful of microscopic biological traces, carefully preserved despite the passage of time, had refused to let the truth disappear with them. As another day in court came to an end, the evidence rested quietly inside sealed containers once again. It no longer waited to identify an unknown killer. Now it stood as the silent witness to decades of persistence, reminding everyone in the courtroom that even the oldest mysteries can continue speaking, provided someone is willing to keep listening. Long before the verdict was read, another investigation had quietly begun. It was not focused on proving who committed the murders. That question was now before the court. Instead, detectives turned their attention to something equally unsettling. How many victims had never been counted? The search expanded far beyond the original homicide files. Investigators reopened missing person reports dating back decades, comparing names, photographs, locations, and timelines against everything recovered during the investigation. Filing cabinets that had not been opened in years suddenly became active again. Digital databases were searched alongside handwritten reports created in an era long before computerized record systems. Every unidentified woman became a question. Every unanswered disappearance became a possibility. The work demanded extraordinary restraint. Investigators refused to assume every unsolved case belonged to the same offender. Similar circumstances alone could never replace evidence. Geography, victim profiles, and timelines offered valuable direction, but only forensic findings and corroborated facts could establish meaningful connections. That discipline mattered. Serial murder investigations have a way of attracting speculation. Once a suspect is identified, nearly every unexplained crime from the same period risks being attributed to the same individual. Experienced detectives know that temptation must be resisted. Evidence decides. Not rumor. Not coincidence. Not public fascination. One discovery continued to dominate discussions among investigators. Thousands of photographs recovered during the search of the suspect's residence. The collection was remarkable not simply because of its size, but because many of the women depicted had never been identified publicly. Some smiled into the camera. Others appeared unaware they were being photographed. A few images looked completely ordinary, capturing moments that could have belonged to any family album. Yet inside the context of a serial murder investigation, ordinary photographs became deeply unsettling. Who had taken them? Why had they been kept? Were the women victims, acquaintances, or complete strangers? The images refused to provide simple answers. Law enforcement agencies released selected photographs to the public, hoping someone might recognize familiar faces. Families scanned the images with equal measures of hope and dread. Friends searched for features they believed they recognized. Calls poured into investigators from across California and beyond. Some women were successfully identified. Many were alive. Others remained unknown. Each confirmed identification eliminated one uncertainty while exposing another. The unidentified photographs lingered as silent reminders that investigators might never reconstruct every chapter of the story. Meanwhile, criminologists began studying the case from a broader perspective. How had one offender remained undetected for so many years? What investigative challenges had delayed identification? What lessons could be learned to prevent similar failures in future serial homicide investigations? The answers proved uncomfortable. Many experts pointed toward the intersection of limited forensic technology, fragmented information sharing, and the reality that victims from marginalized communities often received less sustained public attention than high-profile cases elsewhere. None of those factors excuse failure. Together, however, they illustrated how complex investigations can become vulnerable when multiple systemic obstacles overlap. The case soon entered police academies, forensic conferences, and university classrooms as a powerful example of both investigative persistence and scientific evolution. Young detectives studied the timeline. Laboratory specialists examined the forensic breakthroughs. Students of criminal justice debated the investigative decisions made across several decades. The lessons extended well beyond a single courtroom. Technology had changed. Procedures had changed. Expectations had changed. Future investigators would inherit tools unimaginable when the first victim was discovered. Still, one reality remained constant. Every homicide begins with people. Families waiting beside telephones. Friends refusing to stop searching. Detectives determined not to let another file disappear beneath growing stacks of paperwork. The passage of time never reduced the value of a victim's life. If anything, it increased the responsibility carried by those still searching for answers. Outside official investigations, the case continued to leave a lasting mark on the communities where the crimes had occurred. Residents remembered the years when fear traveled quietly from one neighborhood conversation to another. Parents recalled warning their children to avoid isolated streets after dark. Neighbors spoke about memorial services attended long before an arrest ever seemed possible. For them, the case had never been merely a headline. It had been part of everyday life, part of the landscape, part of memories that remained vivid long after television cameras disappeared. As months passed following the trial, detectives gradually returned to newer investigations. Fresh cases demanded attention. New victims required justice. Yet the legacy of the investigation continued to influence every major homicide review. Evidence preservation received renewed emphasis. Cold case units expanded. Advances in forensic science encouraged agencies to revisit investigations once considered beyond resolution. The ripple effects reached far beyond Los Angeles. Across the country, investigators reopened evidence lockers with cautious optimism, asking whether forgotten biological samples might finally reveal names that had remained hidden for decades. Some would. Many would not. But the possibility itself transformed modern homicide investigations. The story also served as a reminder of another truth rarely captured in headlines. Serial murder investigations do not end cleanly. Even after convictions, unanswered questions often remain. Some identities are never confirmed. Some timelines remain incomplete. Some families continue waiting for answers that evidence can no longer provide. History is rarely perfect. Justice, when it arrives, is often partial. Yet partial justice is not meaningless. It acknowledges the victims. It restores names to forgotten files. It confronts violence that once seemed destined to vanish into silence. Years after the investigation reached its defining moment, one image continued to resonate more powerfully than any courtroom photograph. Not the suspect, not the detectives, Not the evidence, but the shelves inside an evidence storage room. Rows of carefully preserved boxes. Labels bearing dates from another era. Containers sealed by investigators who could not have imagined that future technology would eventually complete the work they had begun. Inside those ordinary boxes lay the invisible thread connecting past and present. A reminder that science advances. Memories fade, but truth has an extraordinary ability to endure, waiting patiently for the moment when someone finally possesses the tools and the determination to uncover it. The crime scene was never truly abandoned. Years after investigators removed the evidence, packed away the photographs, and folded the yellow police tape into storage, the locations where the victims were discovered continued to carry an invisible weight. Traffic flowed past without hesitation. Children played on nearby sidewalks. New buildings appeared where vacant lots had once stood. To most people, the streets looked ordinary. To homicide detectives, they never would be. Every return to a former crime scene revealed something unsettling. The landscape had changed, but the questions had not. Standing in the same places where investigators once worked beneath flashing emergency lights, detectives imagined the decisions made in the final moments before each victim was found. Why this location? Why this neighborhood? Why leave a body here and not somewhere else? Patterns often emerge only after years of observation. The geography itself became evidence. Maps covered conference room walls inside the Homicide Bureau. Color markers identified recovery sites, suspected encounter locations, and routes connecting one neighborhood to another. Investigators traced roads repeatedly, looking for routines hidden inside apparent randomness. A serial offender rarely moves without purpose. Even when crimes appear chaotic, choices are being made. Some locations offered quick escape routes. Others provided darkness, isolation, or limited visibility. Together, they suggested familiarity. The offender knew these streets, not as a visitor, as someone who belonged. That realization shaped investigative thinking long before the arrest. Detectives increasingly believed they were searching for an individual whose daily life unfolded within the same communities affected by the crimes. The killer did not need elaborate planning to navigate unfamiliar territory. He already knew every shortcut, every side street, every overlooked corner. Geographic profiling became one of several analytical tools supporting the investigation. Specialists examined distances between crime scenes, recovery sites, and likely travel patterns. They cautioned that such methods could never identify a suspect on their own, but they could help narrow possibilities and reveal behavioral consistency. Science rarely delivers certainty in isolation. Its strength lies in combination. Forensic evidence, witness accounts, behavioral analysis, geographic patterns, individually imperfect, collectively persuasive. As investigators layered these findings together, a picture slowly emerged, not of a mythical monster, but of a disciplined offender capable of operating within familiar surroundings while avoiding sustained attention. Another question lingered. Why had the murders apparently stopped for years? That gap became central to countless discussions among detectives and criminologists. Some theorized that changes in the offender's personal circumstances interrupted his crimes. Others suggested that investigators simply failed to recognize additional connected cases. A third possibility remained equally plausible. The apparent pause reflected limitations in available evidence rather than a complete halt in offending. Responsible investigators resisted certainty. Without conclusive evidence, speculation remained speculation. The nickname Grim Sleeper itself reflected this uncertainty, describing the apparent gap rather than establishing a verified explanation. Language mattered. Nicknames can shape public perception. Evidence must shape legal conclusions. As the investigation matured, detectives revisited interviews conducted decades earlier. Reading old transcripts often felt like listening to distant echoes. Witnesses described unfamiliar vehicles, chance encounters, fleeting observations made under stressful circumstances. At the time, many details seemed insignificant. Years later, those same details occasionally acquired new relevance when viewed alongside modern forensic findings. The process demanded remarkable patience. No dramatic revelation appeared overnight. Progress emerged through accumulation. One report clarified another. One timeline strengthened the next. A single overlooked notation sometimes redirected weeks of investigative effort. The discipline required to sustain such work rarely receives public attention. There are no television cameras inside archive rooms. No dramatic music accompanies detectives comparing aging documents line by line. Yet this quiet persistence forms the foundation of successful cold case investigations. Every page matters. Every photograph matters. Every preserved fragment of evidence represents another opportunity to approach the truth. Families understood that reality better than anyone. For them, investigations never truly paused. Birthdays passed. Anniversaries arrived. Holiday gatherings continued with empty chairs that never stopped reminding loved ones of what had been taken. Each call from detectives reopened old wounds while offering fragile hope. Hope that this time, perhaps another answer had finally emerged. Many relatives spoke less about revenge than remembrance. They wanted the victims' names restored to public memory. They wanted people to remember who these women had been before they became evidence. Daughters, sisters, friends, neighbors. Lives measured by far more than the circumstances of their deaths. That perspective influenced investigators as well. Behind every case number stood an individual whose story deserved to be told with dignity and accuracy. The investigation gradually became more than a search for one offender. It became an effort to restore forgotten histories, to challenge assumptions, to confront uncomfortable realities about how some crimes receive sustained attention while others quietly disappear from headlines. The lessons extended into the future. Police departments expanded cold case units. Evidence preservation standards continued evolving. Digital record systems replaced aging paper archives. DNA technology advanced at extraordinary speed. Each improvement reflected hard-earned experience drawn from investigations like this one. Yet technology alone cannot solve crimes. Someone must preserve the evidence. Someone must reopen the files. Someone must refuse to accept that the passage of time makes justice impossible. As evening settled over Los Angeles once again, the neighborhoods connected to the investigation looked much as they always had. Streetlights illuminated familiar intersections. Cars rolled steadily through residential blocks. People returned home from work. The city breathed with the same restless rhythm that had continued through every stage of the investigation. Most residents passed these streets without realizing how much history rested beneath the pavement. But for those who had spent years pursuing answers, every intersection carried memory. Every address carried questions. Every solved detail stood beside another mystery still waiting to be understood. Because even after arrests, trials, and convictions, investigations leave behind something impossible to archive. A reminder that truth can remain hidden in plain sight. That ordinary places can conceal extraordinary darkness. And that the smallest piece of preserved evidence, protected through decades of silence, can eventually illuminate an entire chapter of history that many believed had been lost forever. Every investigation leaves behind two stories. One is written inside court records, forensic reports, and official timelines. It is measured in evidence, testimony, and legal conclusions. The other survives in memory, in conversations held years later, in neighborhoods that still remember flashing patrol lights, and in families who continue marking anniversaries long after public attention has faded. The second story is often the harder one to understand. When detectives revisited the communities where many of the crimes had occurred, they encountered residents whose memories had never disappeared. Shop owners recalled nights when entire blocks fell strangely quiet after another body was discovered. Parents remembered insisting that daughters call home the moment they reached their destination. Elderly neighbors spoke of helicopters circling overhead so often that the sound became part of everyday life. Fear had not arrived all at once. It accumulated. Quietly. Patiently. One unsolved homicide became two. Two became several. Rumors spread faster than confirmed information, filling the gaps left by uncertainty. Some believed a stranger was moving through the neighborhood after dark. Others insisted the killer had to be someone local, someone who understood the streets well enough to vanish before police arrived. No one knew which version of the story was true. That uncertainty became its own burden. For investigators, community memories often revealed details absent from official reports. People rarely remembered exact dates or times decades later, but they remembered emotions. They remembered the growing reluctance to walk alone at night. They remembered the conversations held behind locked doors after another victim appeared in the evening news. Emotion cannot replace evidence, but explains the atmosphere in which evidence exists. As criminologists later examined the investigation, many emphasized that serial offenders do not operate in isolation from society. They exploit opportunity, routine, and the assumptions of those around them. They depend on remaining ordinary enough to avoid notice while extraordinary violence remains hidden from public view. That paradox defined this case. An individual suspected of unimaginable crimes appeared, to many acquaintances, entirely unremarkable. He maintained routines. He interacted with neighbors. He occupied the same streets where detectives searched for an unknown predator. The contradiction challenged one of humanity's deepest instincts, the belief that evil should be visible. History repeatedly demonstrates otherwise. Investigators studying serial homicide often describe offenders as individuals capable of separating public identity from private behavior. The contrast can be so complete that family members, co-workers, and longtime neighbors struggle to reconcile the accusations with the person they believed they knew. The public reaction reflected that conflict. Some residents expressed disbelief. Others searched their memories for moments that suddenly seemed suspicious in hindsight. Ordinary conversations acquired new meaning. Casual encounters were reconsidered. Events once dismissed as insignificant returned with uncomfortable clarity. Memory is rarely static. It changes when new facts emerge. Detectives understood this phenomenon well. They approached retrospective recollections cautiously, distinguishing between information genuinely remembered and details unconsciously reshaped by later knowledge. That discipline protected the integrity of the investigation. Facts remained anchored in evidence. Interpretations remained separate. Meanwhile, the broader criminal justice community focused on another enduring lesson: evidence preservation. The investigation demonstrated the extraordinary importance of collecting, documenting, and safeguarding forensic material, even when immediate technological limitations prevented meaningful analysis. The detectives who originally processed the crime scenes could not have predicted future advances in DNA science. Yet their meticulous work ensured those advances would eventually matter. A properly sealed evidence envelope. A carefully labeled biological sample. A complete chain of custody. These procedural details rarely attract headlines, yet they often determine whether justice remains possible decades later. The case became a reminder that today's unanswered question may become tomorrow's solved mystery. Across the country, agencies responsible for aging homicide investigations renewed efforts to examine long-forgotten evidence. Laboratories developed increasingly sensitive analytical methods. Investigators collaborated across jurisdictions more effectively than previous generations could have imagined. Progress arrived through persistence rather than spectacle. Behind every breakthrough stood countless hours of routine work. Reviewing files, comparing records, verifying timelines, testing evidence again, and again, and again. The public often remembers the dramatic moments, the arrest, the courtroom, the verdict. Investigators remember the quieter ones. The first laboratory report suggesting a meaningful connection. The overlooked document rediscovered inside an archive box. The conversation that inspired one more review of evidence everyone else believed had already revealed all it could. Those moments rarely appear in documentaries. Yet they change history. As years passed, the investigation continued influencing discussions about cold case methodology, forensic ethics, and long-term evidence management. Universities analyzed the case. Law enforcement conferences examined its investigative timeline. Prosecutors cited it as an example of how scientific advancement can reshape legal possibilities long after crimes occur. Still, beyond every institutional lesson remained a simple human truth. Victims deserve to be remembered, not because their cases became famous, not because newspapers eventually covered their stories, but because every life interrupted by violence carries equal value, regardless of how much public attention follows. That principle guided many of the detectives who refused to abandon the investigation during its quietest years. They understood something history repeatedly confirms. Cold cases are not inactive. They are waiting for better technology, waiting for forgotten witnesses, waiting for investigators willing to ask old questions in new ways, waiting for the moment when persistence finally overtakes uncertainty. As darkness settled once more across Los Angeles, traffic flowed through neighborhoods forever connected to the investigation. New generations walked streets, carrying memories they never personally experienced. Most knew little about the decades-long search that had unfolded around them. But the legacy remained, not only inside evidence rooms or court archives. It remained in the standards investigators now followed, in the forensic techniques that continued evolving, in the determination to preserve every fragment of evidence, no matter how insignificant it might appear. Because somewhere, inside another sealed evidence box in another forgotten storage room, a microscopic trace may already contain the answer to a mystery no one has yet managed to solve. And when that day arrives, it will not be chance that speaks. It will be the quiet persistence of those who believed that even the oldest silence can still reveal the truth. Silence has a strange way of surviving. Long after investigators leave, long after television crews pack away their cameras, and long after the final courtroom lights fade, silence remains. It settles over neighborhoods that once lived in fear. It lingers inside abandoned case files stacked neatly on archive shelves. Most of all, it stays with the families who continue asking questions that evidence can no longer answer. For detectives, the conclusion of a criminal case rarely feels like an ending. It feels like the closing of one door and the opening of several others. Even after years of investigation, there are still names that could not be connected with certainty, photographs that remained unexplained, and missing person reports that continued to challenge investigators. Every unresolved detail represented another reminder that criminal investigations, no matter how successful, are seldom complete in every respect. The search for certainty does not end with an arrest. It evolves. specialists from multiple disciplines revisited the investigative record, not to reopen settled legal findings, but to understand how the case had unfolded over such an extraordinary span of time. Behavioral analysts studied offender patterns. Forensic scientists reviewed laboratory procedures that had transformed the investigation. Criminal justice researchers examined institutional lessons capable of improving future homicide investigations. Each group reached different conclusions, yet all agreed on one point. Persistence mattered. The detectives who first walked those crime scenes worked with tools that now seem remarkably limited compared with modern forensic capabilities. DNA technology was still developing. Digital record systems were incomplete. Information sharing between jurisdictions often required slow, manual coordination. Despite those limitations, they preserved evidence with enough care that future generations could continue the search. That decision changed everything. Across the United States, similar cold cases began receiving renewed attention. Evidence collected decades earlier returned to laboratories equipped with technology that investigators from previous eras could scarcely have imagined. Tiny biological traces invisible to earlier methods suddenly became capable of identifying offenders with remarkable precision. The message echoed through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Never underestimate preserved evidence. Time can weaken memories. It can erase physical landscapes. It can claim witnesses and investigators alike. But properly protected forensic evidence often survives long enough for science to catch up. That lesson extended beyond homicide investigations. It influenced training academies, forensic laboratories, prosecutors' offices, and evidence management policies throughout the criminal justice system. Every improvement reflected experience earned through difficult cases. Experience paid for by victims who never had the opportunity to tell their own stories. Community leaders also reflected on the years during which fear quietly shaped daily life. Many remembered how trust between residents and investigators had evolved over time. Initial frustration gradually gave way to cautious cooperation as advances in forensic science created opportunities once believed impossible. Building that trust required honesty. Investigators acknowledged past limitations. Communities shared information that might otherwise have remained hidden. Neither side solved the case alone. Progress emerged through cooperation. The investigation also challenged common misconceptions surrounding serial offenders. Popular culture often portrays them as isolated drifters or visibly disturbed individuals whose behavior immediately attracts suspicion. Reality is frequently more complicated. Many offenders maintain employment, develop routines, interact comfortably with neighbors, appear entirely ordinary. That uncomfortable truth has shaped modern investigative thinking. Behavior alone rarely proves criminal responsibility. Evidence remains essential. Objective, testable, capable of surviving both public scrutiny and courtroom examination. As legal proceedings concluded, historians and journalists began documenting the broader significance of the investigation. They described not only the crimes themselves, but the decades-long evolution of forensic science that ultimately transformed the case. The timeline became more than a chronology of violence. It became a history of investigation, a record of how determination and scientific progress gradually overcame obstacles that once appeared insurmountable. Students entering forensic laboratories today inherit methods refined through countless investigations like this one. Every carefully labeled sample, every documented chain of custody, every standardized procedure. Each reflects lessons learned from real cases involving real people. The victims remain at the center of those lessons. Their stories continue reminding investigators why precision matters, why patience matters, Why no evidence should ever be dismissed simply because current technology cannot yet reveal its full value. Years from now, forensic capabilities will almost certainly surpass those available today. Questions currently considered impossible may eventually become straightforward. Cold cases resting quietly inside evidence vaults may once again return to active investigation. That possibility continues inspiring detectives unwilling to accept permanent uncertainty. As evening falls across Los Angeles, the streets connected to this investigation appear much like any other part of the city. Traffic lights change. Storefronts close for the night. Families gather for dinner. New residents move into neighborhoods without realizing the history beneath their feet. Time changes almost everything. Almost. The search for truth leaves permanent marks. Not always visible. Not always dramatic. But enduring. Inside police archives, evidence remains carefully preserved. Inside forensic laboratories, technology continues advancing. Inside communities, memories continue passing from one generation to the next. And inside, every detective willing to reopen a forgotten file survives a quiet belief that justice is not measured by speed alone. Sometimes it arrives years later. Sometimes decades. Sometimes only because someone refused to stop asking questions after everyone else believed the answers had already disappeared. In the end, the greatest lesson left behind was never about one offender. It was about the extraordinary resilience of evidence, the determination of investigators, and the enduring value of every victim whose story deserved to be heard, even after years of silence had tried to erase it forever. Some investigations end with certainty. Others end with understanding. The difference is subtle, but it matters. When the headlines faded and the television crews moved on to newer stories, investigators remained behind, surrounded by shelves of evidence, stacks of reports, and questions that no courtroom could fully answer. The legal process had reached its conclusion, yet the work of understanding the case continued. Every major investigation becomes a lesson, not because it is unique, but because it exposes weaknesses that might otherwise remain hidden. Review boards examined the timeline carefully. Detectives reconstructed decisions made years earlier, comparing investigative strategies with the resources available at the time. Their purpose was not simply to evaluate the past, but to strengthen the future. Could information have been shared more effectively? Could forensic evidence have been prioritized differently? Could separate investigations have been connected sooner? The answers were rarely simple. Hindsight has the advantage of complete information. Investigators in the moment never possess that luxury. They work with fragments, incomplete witness statements, limited laboratory reports, conflicting timelines. Each decision is made without knowing which clue will eventually matter. That reality shaped every stage of the case. What later appeared obvious had once been uncertain. What eventually became decisive had once seemed insignificant. The investigation reminded law enforcement agencies that persistence is often more valuable than certainty. Detectives who preserved evidence without immediate answers unknowingly created opportunities for future investigators equipped with better technology and new scientific methods. That legacy extended well beyond one city. Training programs incorporated the case into discussions about long-term homicide investigations. Young detectives learned that careful documentation is not merely administrative routine. It is an investment in the future. A single overlooked detail today may become tomorrow's breakthrough. Forensic laboratories reached similar conclusions. Advances in DNA analysis transformed expectations across the criminal justice system. Evidence once considered unsuitable for testing gained new value as analytical techniques improved. Laboratories expanded preservation standards, recognizing that future scientific developments might unlock information currently beyond reach. Science had rewritten the possibilities, but science alone could never explain the human cost. Families carried that burden. Years spent waiting for answers cannot be restored by a verdict. Empty birthdays remain empty. Missed graduations never return. Holidays marked by absence continue long after legal proceedings conclude. Justice acknowledges loss. It cannot erase it. Many relatives spoke about remembrance rather than resolution. They wanted future generations to know who the victims had been before their names appeared in police reports. They wanted daughters remembered for their ambitions, sisters for their kindness, friends for their laughter. Violence had ended their lives. It should not define their identities. That perspective gradually influenced public discussions surrounding major homicide investigations. Increasing attention shifted toward telling victims' stories with dignity rather than reducing them to statistics or sensational headlines. The investigation also demonstrated the remarkable importance of community relationships. Witnesses who initially hesitated to speak sometimes came forward years later. Neighbors noticed details only after learning new information. Family members preserved photographs and personal records that later proved valuable to investigators. Justice, in many cases, became a collective effort. Not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent. Criminologists continued studying the behavioral aspects of the case, emphasizing that serial offenders often exploit predictability. Familiar routines, trusted environments, and overlooked opportunities can provide cover for extraordinary violence. Understanding those patterns remains essential for preventing future crimes. Yet experts consistently returned to the same conclusion. Behavioral theories guide investigations. Evidence solves them. Every successful homicide prosecution rests upon facts capable of independent verification. DNA, physical evidence, documented timelines, reliable testimony. The stronger the evidence, the stronger the pursuit of justice. As years passed, newer technologies emerged once again. Digital evidence management improved. Laboratory instruments became increasingly sensitive. Investigators developed more sophisticated methods for identifying connections across jurisdictions. The profession continued evolving. Each generation inherited lessons from those before it. Each breakthrough reflected decades of accumulated experience. Inside evidence vaults across the country, thousands of sealed boxes remained untouched, waiting for future detectives who might ask different questions using better tools. Some of those cases would eventually be solved. Others would remain mysteries. But none would lose their importance. Because every unresolved investigation represents a promise. A promise that evidence will be preserved. A promise that names will not be forgotten. A promise that the search for truth will continue, even when immediate answers prove impossible. Late at night, after office lights dim and courthouse hallways fall silent, police archives tell their own quiet story. Shelves stretch into the distance, each box containing fragments of someone's life, someone's family, someone's unanswered questions. To an outsider, they appear ordinary. To investigators, they represent possibility. One fingerprint, one photograph, one biological sample, one overlooked report. Sometimes that is all history requires to change its course. The story of this investigation ultimately became larger than the crimes themselves. It demonstrated the resilience of forensic science, the patience demanded by cold case work, and the enduring responsibility carried by those who refuse to abandon forgotten victims. Long after public fascination fades, those responsibilities remain. So does the evidence. Silent, patient, waiting, ready to speak again whenever the next generation of investigators is prepared to listen. There is a common belief that justice arrives with a verdict. Reality is far more complicated. A courtroom can determine guilt. A sentence can close a legal chapter. Yet neither has the power to erase decades of uncertainty, restore stolen years, or silence the questions that inevitably survive every major criminal investigation. For the investigators who dedicated portions of their careers to the case, the outcome represented not an ending, but a confirmation that persistence had meaning. Many remembered the earliest days of the investigation, when evidence was collected under circumstances far more limited than modern forensic teams experience today. Every sample had been preserved without knowing whether science would ever become capable of revealing what it contained. That uncertainty required faith. Faith in procedure. Faith in documentation. Faith that one day technology would catch up with determination. It eventually did. The case soon became a reference point for agencies across the country evaluating their own unsolved investigations. Cold case detectives revisited storage facilities where thousands of evidence packages remained untouched for years. They understood that every carefully sealed envelope might contain information impossible to recover if mishandled or discarded. The smallest decision made decades earlier could influence the outcome of an investigation decades later. Evidence preservation was no longer viewed as routine administration. It became a long-term investment in justice. Law enforcement leaders emphasized that advances in forensic science should never encourage complacency. Technology can identify biological traces with extraordinary accuracy, but it cannot compensate for evidence that was never collected, improperly documented, or accidentally destroyed. Scientific progress depends upon disciplined investigative work. The two are inseparable. Training academies adapted accordingly. Future detectives received greater instruction in crime scene preservation, chain of custody procedures, and interdisciplinary cooperation. Prosecutors, laboratory specialists, and investigators increasingly work together from the earliest stages of major homicide investigations, recognizing that successful prosecutions begin long before arrests are made. The lessons extended into public policy as well. Many jurisdictions invested additional resources in reviewing unsolved violent crimes, expanding specialized units dedicated to reopening investigations once considered beyond resolution. Those efforts reflected growing confidence that developments in forensic science could continue transforming the landscape of criminal justice. Not every case would be solved, but more cases now carried genuine hope. Outside official institutions, the investigation continued influencing conversations about memory and accountability. Community organizations emphasized the importance of remembering victims as individuals rather than symbols. Public discussions increasingly acknowledged that many families endure years of uncertainty with little national attention despite experiencing profound personal loss. Recognition matters. Names matter. Stories matter. Each victim represents a life interrupted rather than a headline completed. Historians examining the investigation noted another important reality. Time alters evidence differently than it alters memory. Physical traces may survive intact inside carefully controlled environments. Human recollections rarely do. Witnesses relocate. Details become uncertain. Conversations blend together. Investigators therefore rely upon documentation created as close as possible to the original events. Accurate reports written decades earlier often become more valuable than memories revisited decades later. That principle shaped modern investigative practice. Write everything down. Preserve everything possible. Assume every detail may someday matter. The investigation reinforced those habits in ways few training manuals ever could. Its influence could be measured not only by court decisions, but by the thousands of detectives who adjusted their daily practices because of lessons learned from cases like this. The public often sees dramatic arrests. Investigators remember meticulous preparation. The public remembers verdicts. Laboratories remember years of careful validation. The public remembers headlines. Families remember birthdays that never felt complete again. Each perspective reveals a different truth. Together, they form the complete picture. As the years continued passing, newer generations encountered the case through documentaries, academic studies, and criminal justice courses. Many viewed it as evidence of remarkable forensic achievement. Others viewed it as a reminder that justice delayed carries profound human consequences. Both perspectives were valid. Scientific success did not diminish the years families spent waiting. Nor did the passage of time reduce the significance of eventually identifying the offender through lawful investigative methods. Perhaps the investigation's most enduring legacy lies in its demonstration that persistence often succeeds where certainty initially fails. Detectives who inherited aging files refused to assume earlier investigators had exhausted every possibility. Laboratory scientists continued refining techniques capable of extracting information from increasingly limited samples. Evidence custodians preserved materials with remarkable care despite having no guarantee they would ever prove useful. Each contribution appeared ordinary in isolation. Together, they changed history. Late each evening, evidence facilities across the country become remarkably quiet. Temperature-controlled rooms protect thousands of sealed containers from heat, moisture, and contamination. Inside many of them rests information no current investigator can fully interpret. Yet history suggests that tomorrow's technology may reveal what today's cannot. That possibility defines the spirit of modern cold case work. Patience over frustration. Precision over assumption. Evidence over speculation. The search for truth is rarely dramatic. More often, it advances through countless small decisions made correctly over many years. That quiet discipline transformed one investigation. It continues shaping countless others. Long after headlines disappear and public attention shifts elsewhere, the evidence remains exactly where investigators left it, silent, carefully preserved, and waiting for the moment when another unanswered question finally meets the science capable of answering it. In the end, the case was never defined solely by the man investigators spent decades trying to identify. It was defined by the people who refused to let the victims disappear into history. Long after the last press conference ended and the cameras were packed away, detectives returned to their offices. Evidence was cataloged one final time. Court exhibits were sealed and transferred into secure storage. The files, once among the most haunting unsolved investigations in Los Angeles, became part of the historical record. But history is not the same as closure. Closure suggests an ending. History continues. For the families, the passage of time had created a life divided into two eras, before loss and after loss. No conviction could rebuild birthdays that had never been celebrated together. No courtroom could restore conversations that were never finished. Justice acknowledged what had happened. It could never undo it. That truth remained the quiet heartbeat beneath every legal document, every forensic report, every investigative summary. Behind each page stood a person whose future had been stolen. The investigation also left an enduring legacy within law enforcement. Detectives entering homicide units studied the case not because it was sensational, but because it demonstrated the extraordinary value of perseverance. The officers who first collected evidence could never have predicted that future scientific advances would transform seemingly insignificant biological traces into decisive proof. Yet they preserved them anyway. That decision echoed across decades. It became a reminder that every crime scene deserves meticulous care, regardless of how uncertain the investigation may appear in the moment. A single overlooked detail can separate an unsolved mystery from a solved case years later. Science continues to evolve. DNA analysis has become faster, more sensitive, and more precise than investigators of previous generations could have imagined. Digital databases connect agencies separated by thousands of miles. Evidence management systems preserve information with increasing accuracy. Technology will continue changing. The responsibility to protect evidence will not. The broader public also absorb difficult lessons. Serial offenders do not always resemble fictional villains. They do not always isolate themselves from society. Many cultivate ordinary routines. They work. They socialize. They blend into familiar surroundings. That reality remains unsettling because it challenges comforting assumptions about how danger should appear. Investigators, however, understand that appearances carry little evidentiary value. Facts matter. Physical evidence matters. Verified timelines matter. The pursuit of justice depends not upon intuition alone, but upon disciplined investigation supported by reliable proof. Perhaps that is why this case continues to resonate years later. Not because it offers simple answers, but because it demonstrates that truth can survive extraordinary lengths of time when evidence is protected and investigators refuse to surrender to uncertainty. Across the country, countless cold case units continue opening forgotten boxes, reviewing faded photographs, and testing evidence collected by detectives who have long since retired. Most of those investigators never expected to see every case solved. Still, they documented every detail. They preserved every sample. They wrote every report with the hope that someone, someday, might continue where they had left off. That quiet sense of responsibility binds generations of investigators together. One detective begins the search. Another inherits it. A third finally discovers the answer. Justice is often a relay rather than a sprint. As night settles once again over Los Angeles, the city moves with the same relentless energy it always has. Freeways remain crowded. Streetlights illuminate familiar neighborhoods. Millions of lives unfold beneath the glow of skyscrapers and traffic signals. Most people pass through these streets without knowing how much history surrounds them, without realizing that some of the most important battles for justice were fought not in moments of dramatic confrontation, but in laboratories, archive rooms, interview offices, and evidence vaults where patience quietly defeated time. The legacy of the investigation endures because it speaks to something larger than a single criminal case. It speaks to the determination of families who refuse to forget, to investigators who refuse to abandon unanswered questions, to forensic scientists who continued pushing the limits of what evidence could reveal, and to a justice system that, despite its imperfections, can still uncover truth long after many believe it has vanished. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Some names are still waiting to be restored to forgotten files. Some evidence still rests inside sealed containers, untouched, preserving secrets that future generations may finally unlock. That possibility is what keeps cold case investigators returning to the archives. Because every box on every shelf represents more than paper and evidence. It represents a promise that victims will not be measured only by the years they were forgotten. A promise that truth, however deeply buried, remains worth pursuing. And a promise that silence, no matter how long it lasts, does not always have the final word. Years from now, the headlines will fade. The names of detectives will gradually disappear from public memory. Court transcripts will remain locked inside archives, read mostly by researchers, historians, and investigators searching for lessons hidden between thousands of pages of testimony. New cases will dominate the news. New investigations will capture the nation's attention. But some stories never truly end. They simply become quieter. The legacy of this investigation extends far beyond one city, one courtroom, or one criminal. It survives in every detective who refuses to close an unsolved file simply because too much time has passed. It survives in every forensic scientist who carefully protects a microscopic sample, knowing future technology may reveal what today's instruments cannot. It survives in every family that continues believing answers are still possible, even after decades of uncertainty. Cold cases possess an unusual relationship with time. Most crimes grow weaker as years pass. Cold cases sometimes grow stronger. Memories fade. Buildings disappear. Neighborhoods change. Yet properly preserved evidence remains remarkably patient. It waits. Unaffected by rumors. Unaffected by public opinion. Unaffected by the passage of years. Its story never changes. Only humanity's ability to understand that story evolves. Modern forensic science continues advancing with extraordinary speed. Techniques once considered revolutionary quickly become routine. New methods emerge. Databases expand. Analytical tools grow more sensitive with each passing year. Questions that investigators once believed impossible to answer slowly become matters of careful laboratory procedure. The future will almost certainly solve cases that seem hopeless today. That possibility changes everything. It transforms every evidence room into a library of unanswered questions waiting for better readers. It transforms every forgotten case file into unfinished work rather than abandoned history. Most importantly, it reminds investigators that no victim should ever be measured by the age of an investigation. Justice has no expiration date. Communities carry similar lessons. Every neighborhood touched by violence eventually faces a choice. Forget or remember. Remembering does not mean allowing fear to define the future. It means honoring those whose lives shaped the community's history. It means recognizing that every victim was more than a crime statistic, more than a case number, more than a newspaper headline. They were people whose stories deserved to continue beyond the circumstances of their deaths. That understanding has gradually influenced how major investigations are documented, discussed, and remembered. Increasingly, the focus has shifted toward dignity, toward accuracy, toward ensuring that victims remain at the center of the narrative rather than becoming secondary to the individuals responsible for harming them. Investigators have embraced the same principle. The purpose of a homicide investigation is not merely to identify an offender. It is to speak for those who no longer can. Every photograph collected, every fingerprint preserved, every witness interviewed, every report completed, each represents an act of responsibility towards someone whose voice has been permanently silenced. The investigation also serves as a reminder that progress rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives through discipline, through careful documentation, through collaboration between detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and evidence custodians working quietly behind the scenes. Most of those individuals will never become household names. Their work does not require recognition. It requires precision. Because precision is what allows truth to survive. As another evening settles over Los Angeles, the city continues moving forward, unaware of how many invisible stories exist beneath its streets. Every intersection has witnessed ordinary lives unfolding alongside extraordinary events. Every neighborhood contains memories known only to those who experience them firsthand. Cities remember differently than people do. They preserve history in places rather than words. An ordinary sidewalk, a familiar intersection, a quiet residential block. Locations where life appears completely unchanged, even though history has permanently marked them. The greatest lesson left behind by this investigation is not one of fear. It is one of perseverance, the determination to continue asking difficult questions, the discipline to preserve evidence regardless of immediate results, the patience to trust that science will continue advancing, and the conviction that every victim deserves the same unwavering commitment, whether justice arrives in weeks, years, or decades. Perhaps that is the final truth hidden inside every cold case. Silence is never proof that the story has ended. Sometimes silence simply means the evidence is waiting. Waiting for another detective to reopen the file. Waiting for another scientist to test an overlooked sample. Waiting for another generation willing to continue a search that others began long before them. Because the pursuit of truth is larger than any single investigation, larger than any single courtroom, larger than any single lifetime. And as long as unanswered questions remain, somewhere an evidence box will stay sealed, a file will remain on shelf, and a light will continue burning late into the night inside a detective's office, quietly reminding the world that justice may move slowly, but it never stops searching. When investigators speak about the most difficult cases of their careers, they rarely begin with the arrest. They begin with the waiting. Waiting for a witness who never called. Waiting for laboratory results that offered more questions than answers. Waiting for technology to catch up with evidence collected years before. Waiting for the moment when persistence would finally overcome uncertainty. That quiet waiting became the defining rhythm of this investigation. Every detective who inherited the case understood that they were not starting from the beginning. They were continuing the work of someone else. Every note left inside the file represented another investigator's determination not to let the victims be forgotten. Every preserved photograph reflected a promise that the search would continue, regardless of how much time passed. In many ways, that is how justice survives. Not through a single breakthrough, but through continuity. One generation preserving evidence, the next re-examining it, another finally discovering what everyone before had been searching for. The story also illustrates a reality often overlooked outside law enforcement. Most successful investigations are built upon ordinary excellence. Accurate documentation, careful evidence handling, respect for procedure, relentless attention to detail. These responsibilities rarely appear dramatic, yet they determine whether truth can withstand years of scrutiny inside a courtroom. Without them, even the most advanced forensic science has little to examine. The investigation became a landmark, not because it relied on one miraculous discovery, but because countless individuals performed routine responsibilities with extraordinary consistency. Crime scene technicians, evidence custodians, laboratory analysts, detectives, prosecutors, each contributed a small piece. Together, those pieces revealed a story hidden for decades. For families, however, no professional achievement could erase the emotional cost. The passing years had transformed grief into something quieter but no less powerful. Photographs inside family homes became treasured reminders of lives interrupted far too soon. Conversations often returned to memories rather than legal proceedings, because memories preserved identities that violence could never erase. Justice can recognize wrongdoing. Love continues recognizing the person. That distinction remains essential. As criminal justice systems continue evolving, this investigation stands as evidence that the pursuit of truth depends upon both human determination and scientific progress. Neither alone would have been enough. Science provided answers. People chose to keep asking the questions. That partnership continues defining modern cold case investigations across the world. Some evidence waits patiently for years. Some answers arrive unexpectedly. Some investigations require extraordinary endurance. Yet every solved case reinforces the same principle. No victim becomes less important simply because time has passed. No unanswered question becomes unworthy of another review. No carefully preserved piece of evidence loses its potential to change history. Perhaps that is why the legacy of this investigation continues reaching far beyond the courtroom, where legal proceedings eventually concluded. Its true legacy lives inside every evidence room where forgotten cases remain carefully protected. Inside every detective's office where old files are opened once again. Inside every laboratory where microscopic traces are examined with technologies unavailable to previous generations. And inside every family that continues believing someone, somewhere, has not stopped searching. Because history has shown that silence is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it is merely the space between one generation's investigation and the next generation's discovery. And somewhere tonight, another detective is opening another cold case file, another forensic scientist is preparing another sample for analysis, and another family is holding on a hope that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, still has the power to emerge into the light. That hope remains one of the strongest forces in criminal investigation. It outlives headlines. It outlasts public attention. It survives changing technology, changing investigators, and changing generations. And in the quiet hours, when evidence is all that remains, hope is often the one thing that keeps the search alive. Not every story leaves behind a monument. Some leave behind a file cabinet. Inside those drawers rest photographs that have faded with time, interview transcripts typed on aging paper, maps covered with handwritten notes, and evidence envelopes sealed by investigators who understood that even the smallest detail might one day matter. To most people, they're simply records of old investigations. To detectives, they're unfinished conversations with the past. Every cold case begins with uncertainty. Every solved case begins with someone refusing to accept that uncertainty forever. That determination is perhaps the most enduring legacy of investigations that span decades. Long after headlines disappear, the commitment to seek answers continues quietly inside police departments, forensic laboratories, and prosecutors' offices across the country. Technology may transform investigations. Human persistence gives that technology purpose. Throughout the years, criminal investigators have learned that patience is often their greatest resource. Fast answers are rare. Reliable answers require discipline. Every recovered fingerprint, every preserved biological sample, every carefully documented interview becomes part of a much larger puzzle that may not be completed until years later. The passage of time tests everyone involved. Families learn to live with absence. Communities adapt while carrying memories that never fully disappear. Investigators retire, passing unfinished work to younger detectives who inherit not only evidence, but responsibility. That transfer of responsibility is one of the quiet traditions of homicide work. Cases may change hands. The promise to seek the truth does not. Modern forensic science has dramatically expanded what investigators can accomplish, but it has also reinforced a simple lesson. Evidence cannot speak if it has not been protected. Every successful cold case resolution depends upon decisions made at the very beginning of an investigation. Secure the scene. Document everything. Preserve every item. Never assume today's limitations will exist tomorrow. Those principles continue shaping investigative practice around the world. Beyond law enforcement, the case also challenged public assumptions about justice. Many people imagine criminal investigations as dramatic sequences of breakthroughs and confessions. Reality is far less cinematic. Progress usually arrives through repetition. Review the report again. Compare another timeline. Submit another laboratory request. Interview another witness. Examine another photograph. Most of those efforts produce nothing. Occasionally, one changes everything. The quiet persistence behind those moments rarely becomes famous, yet forms the backbone of every successful long-term investigation. That is why experienced detectives often measure success differently than the public. They celebrate careful evidence preservation, accurate documentation, scientific integrity, professional patience. Those qualities rarely appear on television. They solve cases. Families often describe justice in equally quiet terms. Not as celebration, not as victory, but as acknowledgement. An official recognition that the lives of their loved ones mattered enough for investigators to continue searching long after public attention had moved elsewhere. Sometimes that acknowledgement becomes as meaningful as the verdict itself. It tells families they were not forgotten. That message carries extraordinary weight after years of uncertainty. As forensic science continues evolving, new generations of investigators inherit unprecedented tools. Artificial intelligence assists with document analysis. Digital databases connect information across jurisdictions with remarkable speed. Laboratory techniques recover increasingly detailed information from ever smaller samples. Yet despite those advances, the essential mission remains unchanged. Protect the evidence. Respect the facts. Follow the truth wherever it leads. No technological breakthrough can replace those principles. Late each night, evidence storage facilities remain silent. Temperature-controlled shelves protect thousands of sealed containers collected from investigations stretching back decades. Some belong to cases already resolved. Others continue waiting for the scientific advances that may finally reveal their secrets. Every sealed package represents possibility. Every preserved sample represents hope. Every unopened file represents another opportunity for justice to continue its patient work. Perhaps that is the most powerful lesson carried forward by investigations that refuse to surrender to time. Truth does not become less important because it is difficult to find. Victims do not become less deserving because years have passed. Evidence does not lose its value simply because it has been waiting. Some stories demand extraordinary patience before they are fully understood. Some investigations require more than one generation to complete. And some answers arrive only because someone, somewhere, chose to keep believing that silence is never stronger than the truth waiting beneath it. That belief continues guiding detectives as they unlock archive doors each morning, switch on laboratory lights, and reopen files that others might consider too old to matter. Because experience has taught them one final lesson. History is filled with mysteries that seem permanent, until the day they weren't.